Welcome everyone to a packed marquee. I'm Paul Goodman, editor of ConservativeHome, but I am not going to be troubling you long. My only function this afternoon is to welcome the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, and to say that it's at least 3 hours since I last saw Anand Menon. Here he is at this joint ConHome UK in a Changing Europe event in conversation with the Foreign Secretary. So Anand, it's over to you.
Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. As ever, it's a pleasure to work with ConHome, which we do every Tory conference, and it always works very smoothly, thanks to their sterling efforts. Foreign Secretary, welcome. For you and everyone else, the way this is going to work is as follows. We're going to have a conversation for maybe about an hour, maybe just less. I'm going to throw it open to the audience for questions. I've got a computer here where apparently those who are watching online on the Slido, if they want, can write their questions, and we'll try and get to some of those. Though, for those on Slido, I should warn you, the room is so packed, I might end up just taking questions from the audience, and then we'll see how it goes. Is that okay with you, Foreign Secretary?
Very good, yes.
Excellent. So, just as a starter for 10, I suppose. Actually, as a starter for 10, there's something I'm really curious about, which is reshuffles. So you wake up as Trade Secretary, you go to bed as Foreign Secretary, and the next day you are Foreign Secretary. How do you learn all that stuff so quick? I mean, how does that, just the mechanics of it? I'm really curious.
It's one of the great things about the British system. In other systems, they sort of have weeks of changeover periods, handover periods. In the UK, you get appointed, and you don't even generally go back to your previous department. You go straight to the new department and you start in the job. And so it can be about 20 minutes between being appointed and starting the job, which I call efficient.
And it's just a slew of briefings to start with, is it, about everything conceivable, the world, presumably?
Yeah, I mean, the advantage I've had in being in the trade department is quite a lot of the people I know, quite a lot of the countries I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. I've worked on quite a lot of the areas, so I'm aware of the landscape, but it can be very different in different government departments.
Okay, I've always wondered. You watch it happen, and then the practicalities of it. I mean, it seems a bit mind-boggling. But anyway, so on your brief, what for you does Global Britain mean?
Well, what Global Britain? I mean, this session and your organisation is titled "The UK in a Changing Europe," and I think what Global Britain is about the UK in a changing world, mm-hmm. and the role that we have as a champion of democracy, as a champion of freedom, as a believer in free trade and free enterprise, and how can we exert that influence to positive effect across the world. And in my speech on Sunday, I outlined the concept of the network of liberty, mm-hmm. and what I want us to do is continue to strike more trade agreements, more economic agreements, more security agreements, like the agreement we've just done with the US and Australia, AUKUS, so that we are building a position of strength with our like-minded countries to advance the type of world we believe in.
And what changes can we expect to see under you from foreign policy under your predecessor?
Well, I want to build on the work that Dominic Raab has done. Mm-hmm. So he's been responsible for the merger of the Foreign Office and DFID. That means that we have a full suite of policies to be able to influence things in the right direction. We've also got trade policy under the leadership now of Anne-Marie Trevelyan. We've got defence policy under the leadership of Ben Wallace. And I think what we've really got an opportunity to do for the first time in 50 years is have the full suite of foreign policy tools to be able to advance the cause of Global Britain. And, you know, what do I mean by that? I mean that we want to influence the world in line with our values at the same time as delivering for people here in the UK. So I'm a great believer that free trade helps developing countries succeed. It also helps Britain succeed because it gives more opportunities to our whiskey industry, our car industry, mm-hmm. our tech industry, and so on. You know, our security agreement that I mentioned earlier is going to help deliver jobs in everywhere from Govan in the shipyards to the factories of Tyneside. So this is about a foreign policy that is practical, that is proactive, that is positive, and is optimistic about the future. And there are a lot of people out there saying, we live in very difficult times. There are fewer people living under democratic societies. We're seeing the rise of autocratic regimes. We've been through a period where there has had to be more state control due to COVID. It's inevitable that continues. I don't believe that's true. I think that the most successful societies have been societies that are democracies with strong protections for freedom of speech, freedom of the press, free enterprise. And I think we've got a real opportunity to move the global debate in that direction. And if I give you one example, which is the Australia trade deal that we did, in a world where other countries are erecting protectionist barriers, we've gone out there and we've struck a trade deal which is going to mean completely free trade between the UK and Australia, no tariffs on goods over time, much easier for young people to move between Australia and the UK, much easier for modern technology to be shared between Australia and the UK. And that is the type of approach that I want to see us adopt more broadly.
Okay. For those of you, I realise I'm sitting a bit strangely, but for those of you who can't see, we are perched on the most ridiculous bar stools you could imagine. And I don't know about you, but
it's
I feel
like a bar without any drinks. I mean, I don't know.
Well, except the stool makes you feel like you've had a drink.
Classic Conservative home is what I can say.
So if any of you were wondering why I'm sort of gripping onto this table for dear life, it's because I think I'm going to fall over. But we did an event recently with David Lidington where he said that the Foreign Office at the moment is a pretty demoralised department, not least because of the removal of trade and EU policy from its remit. And he said, you're going to face a challenge in restoring the Foreign Office to its role as a thought leader in Whitehall. So I suppose two questions come from that. One, do you buy that analysis? And two, how do you make the Foreign Office a thought leader in Whitehall again?
Well, I don't want us to be a thought leader in Whitehall. I want us to be a thought leader in the world. I don't got ambitions far beyond Whitehall for what we are doing and saying. The Foreign Office is a fantastic department. We have real expertise. We have fantastic people right across the world. I've just done an all-staff call last week with, I think, approximately 4,000 people were dialed in everywhere from Beijing to Washington to Canberra. We have an amazing network of people that I want to put to full use. And I see the fact that we have got a separate trade department under the leadership of Anne-Marie Trevelyan as additional to the work we do at the Foreign Office. Likewise, the fantastic leadership that Ben Wallace has shown over defence and the fact we're now committed to more than 2% of GDP to spend on defence. These are all parts of what is a really exciting foreign policy opportunity. So I don't see it as taking away from the forest. I see it adding to the Foreign Office. And if you look at the United States, the United States has the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. It's got the USTR, Catherine Tai, who's responsible for negotiating those trade agreements. And they are very aligned in terms of the work we're doing and they're doing. And likewise in the UK, we are very aligned in what we want to do. Anne-Marie has got a huge pipeline of trade deals. We've got a lot of work we're doing together with other countries on defence and security and intelligence. And there are huge opportunities to bring countries like India more closely into our work together, both on the economic and security side. Indonesia, who I had a very good meeting with at the UN General Assembly. Countries like Mexico, who have a real role to play in the modern global economy and are going to be a big global player, in 10, 20 years' time. So I think we've got an opportunity to bring all that together. And, I've been so impressed with the team at the Foreign Office and their positive, proactive attitude since I joined. I think it's 3 weeks. 3 weeks tomorrow. 3 weeks tomorrow.
Happy anniversary.
Since I joined. Thank you very much. Thank you. But I don't know who David Lidington's view, and obviously he was a former minister in the Foreign Office. But again, I think David Frost, with his beliefs and views, adds a huge amount to what we're doing on foreign policy. And you'll have seen that we are setting up a new post-Brexit deregulation unit at number 10 Downing Street to look at the opportunities we have. Now we're no longer subject to the bureaucracy of Brussels to actually do things differently and think differently. And because we no longer are part of that European operation, and there's a sort of, is he a foreign minister? You've got DG Trade, and you've got the high revenue. You've got all of that work that was done by the EU. We are now doing that as the UK, and I think it's right that we've got a big team of people going out there into the world and getting those things done.
I mean, it strikes me that trade is pretty central to your vision of the UK on the world stage and the UK foreign policy. Now, without wanting to wish Anne-Marie Trevelyan out of a job, wouldn't it make a lot more sense if DIT was within the Foreign Office? If you have that integrated vision?
I don't believe that at all, because the Trade Secretary is a full-time cabinet job. I know it is a 24 hours a day job, because you're often negotiating with New Zealand at the other side of the world. You're on a call at 11 o'clock at night and call the next morning at 7 o'clock talking to our friends down under. And that needs full-time attention. It needs a cabinet minister to conduct those negotiations. And there's a huge pipeline. We're about to start talks with India, the Gulf, Israel. The CPTPP has to be negotiated. And that, to me, having done the job, is more than a full-time cabinet job. And, you talked about the economy. But I think it's important to recognise the economy is broader than trade agreements. So one of the areas I really want us to focus on is infrastructure and infrastructure funding, because what we know is that autocratic regimes are offering infrastructure to developing countries. They're trading with developing countries. They're offering economic collaboration with developing countries. And I think it's important that the UK and our allies come up with alternatives for areas like infrastructure funding, for better development funding, and that is all part of what the Foreign Office has to offer, along with the Department of Trade. So for me, of course, it's about trade deals. Those are very important, but it's also about broader collaboration on infrastructure funding and on technology. Again, we want technology standards to be set by the free world, not by autocratic regimes. So again, that's another area where we have to develop their economic collaboration with other countries.
Which kind of brings me briefly to DFID, and I suppose a question in two parts about DFID. One of which is, couldn't you make a similar case for having kept DFID independent of the Foreign Office, that it needs its own department, not least because it is pretty central to your view of foreign policy? I mean, you said in your speech and in your interview with the Times over the weekend that, development is one way to stop autocratic regimes gaining influence, which means A, shouldn't we have a separate and independent DFID? And B, what did you make of the decision to break the 0.7% pledge if development aid really is so central to your agenda?
The important thing is that the government departments that are working on these issues are aligned, and we have a common strategy. And I was part of the development of the integrated review, which outlines our overall foreign policy and how development fits into that, how trade fits into that, how defence fits into that. And I can absolutely assure you that I work hand in glove with Anne-Marie and Ben Wallace to make those things happen. And development being part of the FCDO, I think, is important. So we're using our resources to best effect, particularly on the front line. And we have had to take tough economic decisions. COVID is a one-off, huge pandemic with economic consequences both here in the UK. And what I'm focused on is making sure the money we do spend is spent well. So I want to prioritise girls and women, in particular tackling female genital mutilation, making sure girls get a good education, ending sexual violence being used in war. And I want the development spending to work well with our trade policy. So we've just launched a new developing countries trade scheme to make sure that those work better together. Because quite often what rich countries have done is they've spent aid money in developing countries, but they put up barriers to trade. And my view is the best way to enable countries to get wealthier, to be able to provide for their populations, to empower people in those countries is through enterprise and trade. So I'm very keen that we should have a more liberal trading policy with developing nations. We should enable those developing nations to get up the economic ladder and achieve that level of self-sufficiency. So I think making sure those policies are aligned is really important.
Now, one of the many striking phrases that you've coined is the notion of a network of liberty. That is to say that under you, the UK will seek to sign security relationships with a host of democratic countries around the world. So, first of all, can you just sort of outline that vision for us? How do you see that working?
I just challenge you on one thing you just said, which is it's not just democratic countries.
Okay.
It's democratic countries and other countries who believe in following the rules-based global system,
right,
and that where democracy can be supported. I think that's a really important principle. So if you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, not every country in the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a democracy. However, everybody in that agreement has signed up to intellectual property rights. You know, they've signed up to strong environmental and labour provisions. So I'm not in the business of saying every country in the world has to be a democracy.
Okay.
What I'm saying is I want to live in a world where free enterprise democracies can thrive and where we can create the conditions they can thrive and we can work with other countries. And I'm a great believer in sovereignty. You know, the UK should not be trying to interfere in other countries' sovereign decisions, but what we do want to do is work with like-minded allies who want to see progress across the world in the broadest possible sense. And of course, you know, there are some very close allies like the United States and Australia that we've been able to sign a very deep defence deal with, you know, giving Australia access to nuclear-powered submarines. There are other nations where we might be doing slightly different things, whether it's collaboration on intelligence, whether it's broader collaboration on security. There will be different arrangements for different countries. So the reason why I describe it as a network of liberty is it's not a one-size-fits-all model. You know, we will need different approaches to different countries, but I think the UK is in a very good position to be working with many different partners across the world. And they will, of course, work with each other. So you've got the Quad, for example, is a good example of that type of network already taking place.
Okay. Now, I mean, your predecessor was famously caught on tape talking about human rights and trade, saying that basically if we restrict ourselves to signing trade deals with states that meet the European Convention standards, we're not going to be signing many trade deals, and that's not the point of trade. Would you agree with that, therefore, that there isn't some sort of test of standards before we go around signing trade deals with people?
I think it's very difficult to say what you're going to do in the abstract. You know, what we want to make sure is that every economic partnership we're part of, every security partnership we're part of, is moving things in the right direction towards a freer, more prosperous world. But we can't allow the great to be the enemy of the good. And, you know, I've said this about trade deals, you know, that not every country regulates in the same way as the United Kingdom. And, you know, we cannot be imposing our precise regulatory standards on other countries in order to achieve trade agreements. But, you know, take an agreement like the Trans-Pacific Partnership that has, you know, standards in environment and labour, which are an improvement on the basic standards in the WTO.
Prior to the G7 in Cornwall, there was an awful lot of talk about a D10 grouping being created, that this was a British initiative to bring together democratic states. Is that still on the agenda? Is that still being talked about? It seems to have disappeared somewhat.
That is on the agenda,
Okay.
and in fact, we had a grouping of 11, including South Africa, and we're looking to move that forward. We're also looking at a broader grouping of democracies as well, because democracy is a very important principle. In my view, the best way to you know, create a free society.
Just to turn for a minute to the AUKUS, I suppose the first question about AUKUS is, how does it enhance our security?
It enhances our security by making the world safer.
Okay.
And at the heart of this, the more we work to improve the global economy operating under a rules-based system, the more we work to improve security that underpins that free enterprise economy, the less likely there is to be the encroachment of autocratic regimes or malign actors. I mean, what it is doing is strengthening the alliance of like-minded nations, and that's very important for the United Kingdom. And the freer and more prosperous societies are, the greener they are, the less likely they are to be involved in conflict, the less likely they are to see huge outflows of migration, and that in turn helps keep the UK safe.
In retrospect, do you think the AUKUS negotiations could and should have been handled a bit more sensitively when it came to the French?
Well, the relationship with the French is a relationship between Australia and France. And ultimately it's for Australia as a sovereign nation to make their own decisions about how they equip their submarine fleet. It wasn't a matter for the United Kingdom or the United States. We were not party to that contract. It was a matter between Australia and France. And much as I'm reluctant to get involved in other countries' sovereign decisions, I'm certainly reluctant to get involved in contractual discussions between two other sovereign nations.
It was reported last year that you were slightly at odds with the Foreign Office when it came to whether British courts would have a role in deciding whether human rights abuses were being perpetrated in Xinjiang.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true.
But you've been portrayed as someone as something of a hardliner on China, but equally you've said that China is a very important trading partner. The blunt question is, how much of a threat to us is China? Should China be seen as a threat to us?
It is important we trade with China, but that trade has to be reliable, and it can't violate intellectual property rights or involve forced technology transfer. You recently had some issues with our steel industry, and what we've seen is steel is overcapacity driven by unfair state subsidies. So what I want to see is reform at the World Trade Organization to deal with those types of issues, and I want to see the type of trade agreement like the Trans-Pacific Partnership that ensures all the players play by the rules. And that's what I mean by reliable trade with China. What we don't want to end up with is strategic dependency on China. And certainly during the COVID crisis, when we looked at our supply chains, we found that we were dependent on single countries. I don't think it's good to be dependent on single countries for anything either. I think one of the benefits of striking more trade agreements around the world is being able to diversify supply and have more options. And what I want the UK to have is options. I think that's very important. And my point about building the network of liberty, building those economic partnerships and security partnerships, is it so we're in a position of strength.
Okay.
And I do think building that economic strength underpinned by the security know-how, underpinned by technology standards that are set by the free world, is the best way to make sure the future remains free and prosperous.
Now, during the parliamentary debates, Theresa May raised the prospect that AUKUS might make it more likely that we're dragged into a war over Taiwan. Was she right?
I'm not sure that was the implication. I was sitting in the House that day. I was not sure that's the implication of what she said. But my very strong view is that AUKUS and similar security partnerships will help keep us protected and help prevent conflict, which is ultimately what we should be aiming for, is to have better security collaborations with our like-minded friends and allies. We need to bring more countries into our circle of influence and our circle of economic influence. And the best way to do that is to reach out to them through trade, through infrastructure, but also through sharing security know-how and sharing defence know-how.
Now, in your conference speech and in the various interviews you've given, you've listed a whole load of prospective or actual partners, whether it's the United States, whether it's Australia, whether it's India. You seem to have consciously steered clear of mentioning either individual European states and particularly the European Union in those lists. Was that deliberate, and if so, why?
I did mention the G7.
You did?
Which does have the European Union in it, and it's got France, Italy and Germany in it.
Yeah.
And I also mentioned the Baltic 3.
Yeah, all right,
and
okay.
the Visegrad 4 as well. So there wasn't a deliberate omission. What I think we've got an opportunity to do though is strengthen a lot of our bilateral relationships across Europe, and also really concern ourselves about the security of the Baltic states in particular. That is a very important area, and I wanted to reassure those very close allies of the United Kingdom that we very much stand with them. I also mentioned NATO, of course, which also includes.
And of course, in the
going through all international organisations, there's a list as long as your arm. But what I want to show is a direction of travel about the types of nations and organisations that we are actively going to be reaching out to strengthen our relationships.
So people shouldn't read a slight into this?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Do you think it would be easier to work with the European Union if the trade and cooperation agreement had something on foreign and security policy in it? Or are you perfectly happy that...
I'm perfectly happy.
Right.
There are clearly issues that need to be resolved over the Northern Ireland Protocol, which Lord Frost is working on, but it's a good deal that we secured, and we now need to work together to promote the values that we mutually agree with. And you mentioned France earlier. There've been ups and downs in our relationship with France, I think it's fair to say, but France is fundamentally a free market democracy and a very close neighbour of the United Kingdom, and of course they have to be part of the global effort to improve our prosperity and security.
Just a couple of things on Lord Frost and his role then. The first is, at the moment, a chunk of our relationship with Europe is being dealt with out of the Cabinet Office rather than the Foreign Office. Would you expect, once the protocol is sorted out, once our relations with the European Union are more of an even keel, that will come back into the Foreign Office?
I'm not going to make any more machinery of government.
All right, okay.
These think tankers absolutely
this is
machinery of government. They love this machinery of government stuff. The way I see it is we're one team.
Right.
Lord Frost, the Foreign Office, Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, the Department of Trade, the Ministry of Defence, we're all one team. We all agree. We've all got roles to do. There is plenty of work to be done, as I'm sure if you were having this conversation with Lord Frost, I'm sure he'll tell you he's got quite a busy schedule as well. And we're all working very closely together. Foreign Office work very closely with the Cabinet Office, and we really are focused on getting the job done.
Now, one of the striking phrases you used in your interview with The Times was, people know we're reliable, and when we say we will do something, we will do it. What would you say to accusations from some Europeans that is precisely what we're not doing with the protocol? That is to say, do you think our reputation as a state that sticks by its commitments will suffer as a result of the ongoing fight over the protocol?
No, absolutely not. We were very clear when the Northern Ireland Protocol was put in place that it did need to respect the Good Friday Agreement, and it needed to be applied in a pragmatic fashion, and that is what we are seeking to achieve.
How important a partner to the UK is France?
It's an important partner.
Because, we work very closely with them, for instance, in the Sahel, don't we? It strikes me that, underneath the diplomatic rumpus, we continue to work remarkably closely with them on a number of...
Of course we do, and we're working with them on Afghanistan, we're working with them on Iran, and, I want to make sure that, France is fully involved. We've talked about democracies. France has a very important role to play in that as well. And
what do you think the impact will be of...
But there are lots of other important countries in the European Union as well, such as Spain is a very important partner, Italy, Germany. I could go through a whole list, and I've already mentioned the Visegrad 4 and the Baltic 3. So I don't think we should
we'd have to do
favour
more one by one.
one partner to the exclusion of others. This is about being open and looking to exert our influence more broadly in both the economic and the security sphere.
But just a sort of more reflective question on Germany. What impact do you think the departure of Angela Merkel is going to have, if any, on the European Union, on our relations with the European Union? Do you think that's going to be a significant factor?
Well, it's hard to say when we don't know the identity
absolutely.
of the new German Chancellor or the makeup of the government. We started this conversation by talking about how rapid the British system is in terms of reshuffles, and that's not the experience that we have with a lot of our friends and colleagues around the world. But Germany is, of course, a hugely important partner to the United Kingdom, and a force for good in the world.
Now you stress issues of liberty, and particularly, of course, free trade, but liberty too in your talk about values and foreign policy. Do you think that might get in the way of our relationships with the Hungarians and the Poles?
The Hungarians and Poles are important allies of the United Kingdom. I said what I said earlier about sovereign decisions of nations, and of course, I'm a huge believer in free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of action, free trade, free enterprise, a smaller government. All of those things were important to me. But I also believe that sovereign nations are better influencing other nations through building up economic relationships, building up those relationships of trust, rather than necessarily going in and telling other countries what to do.
Okay. Just a couple of things on the United States. I mean, firstly, does the way in which the United States pulled out of Afghanistan make you think that ultimately Europeans are going to have to learn to do more for themselves in terms of security?
I think what we're seeing is, a shifting of particularly economic power towards the East. And this is one of the logics behind the UK joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we are seeing the need for more countries to step up to be part of that economic and security framework that's going to help keep the world free and prosperous. So Japan, for example, have been very forward-leaning on trade.
Yeah.
When the US withdrew from TPP under Donald Trump, the Japanese stepped forward, they brought the alliance together and they got that done, which is a huge achievement. And of course, the UK now wants to be part of that, and there are others interesting in joining. I think India is another very interesting example of a country, close ally of the United Kingdom, now wants to negotiate a new trade deal with the United Kingdom. I also believe they're in negotiations with other partners such as Australia. So again, that's a country that wants to be part of those economic alliances with like-minded allies. So, of course, the United States is important, but there are other countries, there are other groupings of countries that are stepping up, which I think is a good thing.
Has the apparent reluctance of the US to move ahead quickly with a trade deal surprised you?
To quote myself from yesterday, nothing surprises me or doesn't surprise me. That's politics for you. And I think in the United States, there has been a reaction against trade. And it's significant in the 2016 US election that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump advocated not pursuing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So I think it's an issue with trade and the debate about trade in the United States rather than an issue about the UK. And that's what we have to recognise. Now, of course, I would like to see a trade deal with the US. I'm sure Anne-Marie Trevelyan would like to see a trade deal with the US, but there are plenty of other trade deals for us to be working on. I can assure you that the trade team will be kept fully utilised.
And just out of curiosity, are you a fan of the phrase special relationship?
I think it's a bit, because I do love the United States. I think it's a fabulous country and a very, very close ally of the United Kingdom. But we've got other close allies as well. I mean, Australia are becoming an increasingly close ally of ours. We've got important relationships across Europe. We have an important relationship with India. So it's special but not exclusive, is what I would say.
And what do we bring to the table that other countries don't when it comes to the United States? I mean, people have often argued that we make a unique contribution, we're uniquely placed to be that partner. But beyond sort of shared language, culture and heritage, what it is about us that would make them see us differently?
I don't feel we're in competition with other countries to be the United States' best friend. I mean, I just don't.
Okay.
That's a sort of slightly.
I mean, governments in the past have given that impression sometimes.
But that's not the way I would look at it. I would look at the fact that, I want the United States and Japan to have a close relationship with each other. I think that's to the benefit of the United Kingdom. I think it would be to the benefit of the United Kingdom should the United States join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I want to see a closer relationship between India and the United States. So I don't think these things are a question of, there's some kind of beauty parade of countries and the UK has to be front and centre and we're worried, like some teenage girl at a party if we're not, we're not considered to be, good enough. I just don't see it like that.
That's a nice analogy. You recently had the first Foreign Secretary level meeting with Iran since I think 2018. Is that a sign that you're going to bring increased urgency in pushing for the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe?
It's absolutely a sign of my determination to see all of the British detainees returned home.
Okay. Do you think we put enough focus in our foreign policy strategy in the integrated review on sub-Saharan Africa, which is a part of the world that is going to grow tremendously in terms of both economic and population size over the next few years, but it seems slightly downplayed in the integrated review?
Well, I talked earlier about our trade policy, which has, we've done trade deals now covering Ghana, covering Kenya, South Africa. I know that there is more work going on in terms of trade with Africa. I think that's very important. And I've talked about the development work, particularly on infrastructure financing and how the UK can work with like-minded allies to provide alternatives to infrastructure financing from other countries. So I think all of those are important. But this is where I think working with our allies is absolutely crucial.
How important do you think personal diplomacy is in your role?
Very important.
Okay. No, it's just interesting. I mean, the change of foreign secretary. Some people would just say,
I spend all day on the phone. Is what you need to know.
All right. Okay. One of the other striking things about, I was going to say your tenure as your 3 weeks as foreign secretary, is that you link it very, very clearly to domestic outcomes. So you talk about trade deals and domestic jobs. You talk about how foreign policy impacts on us as a country at home. And I suppose the first thing is, do you get the impression that the British public pay attention to foreign policy? Do you think that it matters to them? I mean,
I think it matters hugely to them.
Right.
And I think one of the things before the EU referendum was the sort of trope that no one really cares about this, that, this is a sort of small minority of people who are interested in the structure of the European Union. Actually, that referendum, I think, saw the highest turnout of any vote that we've ever seen. Is that right? Maybe any vote that we've ever seen. And I think that what is quite interesting about the political debate at the moment is what's going on in the Labour Party. This kind of argument about patriotism in the Labour Party and the sense that some in the Labour Party are slightly sneering about Britain's future. They want to sort of talk Britain down on the global stage. And I think people really, really, really dislike that, because they like to see us being successful. It's one of the reasons we did a recent some opinion polling when I was at the Department of Trade that shows the popularity of trade deals has gone up, and the popularity of free trade has gone up, because people like to see the UK out there in the world making a difference, demonstrating our values in action, at the same time as delivering for the United Kingdom. And you had the scene last week at the Labour conference where the Labour conference voted against the AUKUS deal. They actually voted against sharing our nuclear power technology with one of our closest allies, Australia. And that just strikes me as completely out of touch with what the British public think about foreign policy. I think people do have strong views about Britain's role in the world, and they want to see us out there, they want to see us being positive and proactive and not ashamed of who we are.
Okay, amongst many of the striking phrases you use, you've talked about banging the drum for Britain abroad to deliver for people at home. Now, I can sort of see that.
I love the way you're just repeating.
Well, no, I'm just sort of giving, taking out your greatest hits.
You can use that. You can use that if you like,
Anand. Obviously, I'd always footnote it. But, so, I mean, that makes sense with the trade agenda, I think. But can you give me some examples about how, with foreign policy, banging the drum abroad is going to deliver for... I mean, all right, you create a more stable and secure world, I see that. But are there other specific areas where you think, through your work as Foreign Secretary, you can bring back sort of deliverables to the British people?
Well, I've talked about the benefits of these security deals for our shipyards back home, for our factories back home. We've got a big defence industry and huge opportunities there. Of course, there are the direct benefits of trade, but there's also the broader benefits to brand Britain, if you like, of Britain being out there as a positive force on the world stage. And some of those things are more intangible. How do you value the influence of Liverpool Football Club or Manchester United overseas? But if you go to some countries...
Very low.
Are you a Leeds United supporter? Yeah. We've had this discussion. Well, I didn't even talk about the brand of Norwich City, which is higher than any of these brands. But
discuss.
These things are powerful influences across the world, and it's something. So
I can't bring myself to nod. I mean, I'm just.
You can count the sort of cold hard cash of, the whiskey we've sold, or the ships we've sold, or the computer games we've sold, or the financial services. But there's also that intangible influence that we have through what we are on the global stage. And I think people have a real sense of that here in Britain.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about more domestic things? I mean, you hold the equalities brief still. It strikes me that at the moment we have a situation where in both parties the equalities brief is a sort of is given to someone who holds a major office of state, or a sort of opposition office of state in the case of Annalise Dodds. Do you think that's as it should be, or does it deserve more than that?
Well, I think it is absolutely right that it's held by somebody doing another job, because if you had a separate equality brief and a cabinet minister responsible for that and nothing else, you would see the other secretaries of state palm off their issues to that other cabinet minister, and that would be my concern. So who's responsible for making sure that we are treating girls and boys and people of all ethnicities equally in the school system? It should be Nadhim Zahawi, and that should be absolutely part of his brief, because it's part of our philosophy as a party and a country that people should be treated equally. And what I worry about is if that responsibility gets hived off to somebody else. Of course, I see. I have a role in talking to my fellow cabinet ministers. We're just working on the equality data project to identify where the biggest gaps are in equality across Britain. We're about to release some new data soon, and I will use that to inform my cabinet colleagues about where they need to be looking at within their areas. But ultimately, they have responsibility. They have responsibility for looking at how how their departments are treating people equally, rather than it being sort of a separate issue. And I think this goes to the point about identity politics. I very much believe in the principle of individual humanity and dignity. What is dehumanizing is to be treated as a woman rather than a person, as just a box ticked, if you see what I mean, rather than somebody with your own talents and ideas and hard work. And that's what we really need to get the focus back on. Rather than seeing people as part of an identity group, we need to see them as individual humans, and we need to, I want people to be treated the same regardless of their sex or their sexuality or their race, not because of it. And I think that's the problem with the debate and the way it's prosecuted at the moment. It's almost, it becomes about the characteristic rather than about the person themselves.
And I know you've talked about sort of sovereign decisions by sovereign states, but at the margins, is there no tension between holding the equalities brief and, for instance, trying to enhance our relationship with, say, Saudi Arabia?
So, of course, we, by developing positive economic relationships with countries, it allows us to talk to them about areas like human rights and talk about how we can improve outcomes for women and girls and how we can improve girls' education. So, of course, we will have those robust conversations with countries that we deal with. But I do object to the idea that because I'm equality minister, I should care more about equality. Everybody should care about equality, regardless of what cabinet position they hold. You don't just care about something because you've been given the job title. You care about something because it's in your DNA. And my fundamental belief is that individual liberty and dignity and the ability to live your own life and control your own destiny is important, whoever you are, wherever you live in the world. Now, I'm not a utopian. I don't believe that I can wave a magic wand and achieve that tomorrow, but I want every single thing I do to be moving things in that direction.
Okay.
So I'm an idealistic pragmatist.
All right. Okay. There's another phrase I'll use. And finally, on this section, is it transphobic to say that only women have a cervix?
No.
There we go. Thank you very much. What do you take? What for you? What does levelling up mean?
See, levelling up means that wherever you are in the country, whatever your background is, you have the same opportunity to succeed.
And you famously, it's another of your phrases, you see, little Tories. I think, was that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Do you think, given the problems the UK economy is currently facing, this is the sort of thing that might make little Tories lose faith in the party? I mean, it's, shortages, fuel queues, things like that.
We need to be very, very focused on ensuring that, when people look at voting Conservative the next election, that there are opportunities are getting better, they're feeling better off, they know their kids are going to be getting a good education. Those are the important things that people make their electoral decisions on, and of course the cost of living is one of those things.
Now, you were one of the authors of the book Britannia Unchained, which spelled out a very clear vision of the UK economy going forward. Do you stand by that publication and what it said? I mean, obviously we're in radically difficult circumstances, but as a vision of the UK economy.
It was a concept. It was a concept, and the authorship of the book was many and varied. There were 5 different authors, so although we take kind of collective responsibility, I wrote some bits and not others. So
okay.
There's such a thing as called
the
Dominic Raab defence, which is saying that Dominic wrote the anything that's remotely controversial.
Fair enough. But I mean, it sort of brings us to the question of what conservatism is these days. Now, I understand we've had COVID. It's an absolutely unique sort of crisis that has necessitated state spending on an unprecedented scale. But if at the end of this government's tenure in power, taxes are higher than they were in 2019 and the state is bigger than it was in 2019, would that be a failure?
But the absolutely key thing we need to do is get economic growth going. That is vitally important. Of course, trade deals are a key part of that, and getting more companies exporting, attracting more investment into Britain. We've got the Global Investment Summit coming up on the 18th and 19th of October. And of course, economic liberalisation is important. So the planning reform that Michael Gove is doing is going to be crucial. Free ports are going to be important. You know, the only way we're going to be able to pay for the massive cost of COVID, which we had to do as an emergency situation, is through growing the economy. And it's why I mentioned the work David Frost is doing on sort of streamlining our regulatory system. But I'm not going to make economic predictions. I mean, anybody who says they can predict the future of the economy is a charlatan. And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. What I know is that every sinew of the government needs to be strained to create the conditions for enterprise to thrive across the country. And you asked me about levelling up. I mean, one of the biggest divides in Britain is the number of enterprises per person across the country. And we do need it to make it easier to set up businesses. We need it to make it easier to be able to do that in every part of our country. And in fact, what COVID has done is it's accelerated the adoption of technology. It has made it easier to work remotely. And I think we should use that to our advantage, to be able to reach out to towns and villages beyond the major cities.
Okay, I'm going to come to the audience just in a couple of minutes. I've just got a couple more questions. There's nothing on Slido yet, so if you're watching on YouTube, then do send your questions in. It is perfectly conceivable I'm doing this wrong, and there are loads of questions on Slido that I can't see, but I'll have a look at that in a minute. I'm going to ask you a question you've already been asked, just to see if you've changed your answer, just for a bit of fun. Who's the best foreign secretary this country's ever had?
It's still Boris Johnson.
Okay, all right, there's a consistency there. You are consistently the most popular member of the cabinet amongst Conservative activists, at least according to our host's ConservativeHome. Why?
What? Sorry. Said you're rubbish. Well, I'm going to be marked. I'm going to be marked down on the next
She
ConservativeHome.
said your stills were rubbish.
All I said there was a lack of drinks at this bar. Look, I mean, I don't know how Paul Goodman runs the ConservativeHome poll. I can tell you I haven't bribed him yet. But you know,
we don't need to.
I do what I do because it's important to me that we have a country where people are free to succeed, and we open up opportunity for everyone. And I'm just going to carry on doing that. I don't really have a comment on the poll.
Well, I have to say the highest compliment I can pay you is that Paul at the start said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave after a couple of minutes to go to something else," and he stayed. So, bravo. I think there are some microphones. I'm just trying to find out. Okay, so actually the gentleman's standing right, and he's going to have an advantage because he's right in my eye line.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, you said at the outset of this session, I think you used the phrase continued assurance or reassurance for the Baltic states. As I understand it, the three Baltic states are all members of NATO, and the central premise of NATO is that an attack on any one member is an attack on all of them. So in so much as if Russia tried to do to, say, Latvia what it did to the Crimea, they'd find themselves at war with Britain and America, what more reassurance do they need?
Well, NATO has been an incredible force for peace and stability, and we need to continue to develop NATO's capabilities. And I simply make the point that the Baltic states are very important allies of the United Kingdom.
Do you believe, like President Macron, that NATO is brain dead?
No, I don't. I think it's a very important force.
Okay. The lady, I'll try and keep the questioners near each other for the sake of the mic.
Thank you very much. Foreign Secretary, it's already been said that you now have a world-leading development department and do your brief, which has, is part of the reason why Global Britain is a world leader. What are you going to do as Foreign Secretary to make sure that the Development Office within the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office is able to reach its full potential rather than being perhaps sidelined by the Ministry of Defence or Trade?
Machinery of government.
The development offer that the UK has is a very important part of our overall foreign policy, and I think the fact it is now part of the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office enables us to, really maximise its effect across the world, and I think that's a positive thing.
Go ahead, madam.
Farah Faisal, the High Commissioner of Maldives. Very nice to hear your talk, Foreign Secretary. We've heard you talk about, alluded to the fact about human rights and trade deals and things like that. It's been said here. But for a country like Maldives, environment is the key, and we face a lot of, issues of climate change, and it's an existential threat to us. Surely, one of the key things when you talk about trade should be sustainability and sustainable products. And would you say that that would be a key factor when you're doing trade deals, and that it should be really rewarded when you do trade?
So, in all of the trade deals we sign, we have environment chapters. But where there are sort of broader issues, I mean, the overall issue of carbon leakage, so this is the idea that, you shouldn't outsource production of carbon elsewhere and essentially damage your own industry and not achieve improvements. I think those things should be agreed on a multilateral level. So the first best option is at COP, getting everybody to sign up to the net zero target. The second best option is getting some agreement on carbon leakage at the World Trade Organization. And the third best option is taking action in individual trade deals. But I would prefer us to get to a global consensus on that, because, you've talked about the climate vulnerability of the Maldives. And the fact is, we need a global solution to this problem. That's why we've got the COP summit. And I think if, it might be necessary, but it's not desirable for individual countries to be including these things in trade negotiations. It should be part of a broader global compact, in my opinion.
But you don't think that including it in trade deals helps hold people's feet to the fire at all? Just adding to the pressure?
There are some, there's not exactly black and white in this. There are some grey areas, and of course, we do have environmental provisions in our trade agreements, and we've got provisions on all kinds of other things, whether it's, SPS or intellectual property standards. There's always there's a question of how countries put in place their environmental regulations, and I'm, quite reluctant to interfere in the sort of regulatory landscape of other countries. I think what's important is the outcome. But ultimately, under the World Trade Organization, we've already got very low tariffs in a lot of goods. So, and if you look at who the UK's largest import partner is, it's China. So the trade deals with third-party countries isn't necessarily going to shift the dial on that. What will shift the dial is global agreement on net zero, or embedding some kind of carbon leakage provision at the World Trade Organization.
So you've just triggered a machinery of government question in my mind now. I'm
not
going to ask it.
I've never heard anybody quite so obsessed with the machinery of government. Do you want to get a job at the IO, what are they called? The Institute of Government, yes.
Never heard of them.
Thank you for the Secretary. And my name is Timothy, and I'm actually a North Korean SKP, and I hope I am one of the first North Korean SKP you are actually directed the question and to you. You can imagine what question I'm going to raise, and I have two questions for you. And I wrote many letters to your predecessors as well, to Jeremy Hunt and Dominic Raab as well. I will continue write my letters to you. So what's your view on...
Can you be as quick as possible? Sorry, could you just be as...
North Korean regime? That's my first question. Because you see you are quite pragmatist and you are efficient personality and characteristic work on foreign policy. And second question is, China continued to repatriate North Korean escapees. And China, although is a member of the international chartist country with refugee convention, but they don't respect international rules, the refugee convention of North Korean escapees. There are currently around 200,000 North Korean women and girls are trapped in China's human trafficking industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And in fact, when I was in Seoul, I did meet some escapees from North Korea, and I found their testimonies both harrowing and extremely, the bravery and being able to escape that horrific regime was incredibly impressive. And of course, we are very keen to work. I haven't mentioned South Korea, but it is a very important ally of the United Kingdom. And I look forward to reading your letter and seeing what more we can do.
I think the people with the microphones are starting to realise that I'll soon lose control of this, and I'll take it up. So that's great. As the quicker you realise that, the better. But the gentleman over there.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. My question is, what do you see the role of global Britain in containing Russia's malign activity, particularly in cyberspace? Thank you.
Should we check them? Are you all right taking them one at a time? I just think it's...
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
I think I've got to go in a few minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
As I've said, the race for technology is very, very important, and it's important that the free world sets technology standards. And that is why we should be working and are working with colleagues across the G7 and more broadly to set those standards in technology. To my mind, that positive building of alliances is the best way to counter malign forces.
Gentleman there.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. One of the results of leaving the EU was that we also lost the ability to avail ourselves of the Lugano Convention. We since reapplied and have not been able to secure our position there. That was called by the Law Society Gazette a matter of genuine concern for the UK. What is your comment on this, and what do you think we can do to rectify the situation?
Well, this is something I'm sure that Lord Frost is working on, but it's very important, of course, that we continue to promote our legal services industry and that we do all we can to make it easier for them to do business around the world. I will comment on the Australia trade deal, which obviously has very good provisions around mutual recognition of professional qualifications for lawyers. And by the way, there's an absolutely huge opportunity in India, I think, for our legal services industry.
Gentleman over there.
Foreign Secretary, I'd like to ask about the mass migration of people from south to north, and particularly in relation to sub-Saharan Africa, where the populations are projected to double, treble over the next 20, 30 years. So, and there's been a mass migration from villages to urban society, and I suspect that this could cause pressure. And could we actually have aid given to actually do land assessment and water projects in Africa?
So this is the point I was making earlier, that the freer and wealthier societies are, the less likely, the more stable they are, the greener they are, and the less likely they are to see outward migration flows, which is one of the reasons why the infrastructure investment is so important, is one of the reasons why improving trade links with developing countries is important, so they are able to achieve that prosperity.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left in which we need to cram both the questions and the answers. Michael, you've been waving at me desperately. The lady there, and then I'm going to take one more from, then the lady behind Michael, and then if we can squeeze. But can you ask your questions very, very quickly, and can we just gather these, Foreign Secretary, just to speed things up a bit?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Where are things on President Xi coming to COP26? And how much does it matter that he does?
Hello, is this working? Hi.
Yep.
Georgina Bailey from The House magazine. 2 weeks ago, the Council of Europe put out a report on LGBT hate crimes, which attributed some of the rise in hate crime to some of the government's rhetoric on trans rights, and specifically what you've said about self-identification. Have you read the report, and do you have a response?
Do we have another question, or shall I just answer those two?
There was a lady who got the microphone this side, I think, after Michael. Yeah, the lady there. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by this.
My question is, at international trade negotiations, do you think there's ever a conflict between the interests of developing and developed countries? And if that's the case, should the UK always prioritise its own interests?
I think that's enough to be going on with her.
Certainly is. President Xi, it is important that China is part of the solution on climate change. Of course it is. And, we want them to be engaged on that. But I can't comment on the precise attendance of COP26. On the subject of LGBT rights, I think we've struck the right balance between making the process for gender recognition simpler and kinder, whilst also maintaining the checks and balances in the system. And under the Equality Act, it's very clear that single-sex spaces can be protected by organisations. On the point about developing and developed countries, it sort of goes back to Peel and the Corn Laws, really, that there are always going to be concerns about lowering trade barriers. And sometimes those concerns are real and sometimes they're perceived. But over the long term, if you protect your domestic industry and don't allow it to be subject to competition and innovation, ultimately your industry will become less competitive relative to the rest of the world. So it will be bad in the long term. So, and likewise, if we keep trade barriers up with developing countries and they're not able to export to the UK as much, then that will hamper their opportunities and growth and be more likely to lead to instability and some of the negative consequences we just talked about. So I unequivocally believe that free trade, provided it's properly under rules and not subject to the encroachment of intellectual property violation, I believe free trade is a good thing for everybody, and it's lifted millions of people out of poverty. And we need to make that argument here in the United Kingdom. But protectionism is and this debate's been going on for hundreds of years. It's superficially attractive, but it is fundamentally not the way forward.
The Foreign Secretary's enjoying this so much, she's going to stay another 5 minutes, apparently. Was that? 5 questions? That's very open-ended. I've completely lost track of where the microphones are now, obviously. Who's got the microphone on this side? Oh, you've got the microphone. That's very organised of us. The gentleman nearest you, and on this side, and then we'll work.
Hi, Elizabeth. Daniel Evans from Putney. Should the Equalities Brief be renamed Fairness? Would that make it less at odds with liberty? And would it make it more conservative and more British?
I'll take all the questions together.
Good afternoon, Foreign Secretary. As Secretary of State for the Commonwealth as well as Foreign Affairs, what role do you see the Commonwealth playing in the grand scheme of, how important do you think it is in the grand scheme of sort of global politics? And what's it like to be head of MI6? Well, not head, but responsible for MI6.
We can talk. Gentleman at the back.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Indonesian Ambassador. 2 short questions. Do you have any plan to work together with all female foreign ministers in the world? That would be very powerful groupings. The second question, where will you be in the next, or let's say within 5 years, Downing Street 10? Sorry, this is a naughty question. Thank you.
Hello?
There's a lady at the back there. I think
Yes.
that's 4, so we have one more after this. I'm trying
Hi.
to. Yeah.
The Defense Secretary earlier mentioned how the MOD would respond to tackling instability across the world, and I just want to get your view on what beyond trade the FCDO could be doing to respond to that issue as well. Thank you.
And the final question from the gentleman. This is entirely the fault of your SPADs, okay? These last 5 questions, to make that utterly clear.
Yeah, they are. They're for the high jump after this.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. During this afternoon and throughout conference, I was pleased to hear of your commitment to using the development budget to advance the rights of women and girls. As you can probably be aware, after COVID, AIDS-related illnesses is the second leading cause of death of women, and 5,000 new young women die or are newly affected by HIV every week. So given the Global Fund's proven impact in advancing the rights of women and girls and combating infectious diseases, HIV, TB and malaria, do you intend for the FCDO to continue a strong partnership with the Global Fund and continue its leading position as a donor as well?
That's 5.
Thank you. So the word equality can mean different things, but for me it's all about equality of opportunity. Which is fundamentally about fairness. So the name is less important than what we're actually talking about here. It's, does everybody have good access to education, good access to employment opportunities, good access to basic infrastructure like transport? Do they have a good, access to the health service? Those are the kind of questions that are important, and those are the bread and butter equality issues I'm focused on. The Commonwealth, I've already chaired a meeting of the Commonwealth Foreign Ministers. It was a virtual meeting, but I'm hoping to do it in real life soon. The Commonwealth is very important. I mean, if you look at the World Trade Organization, the Commonwealth represents 33% of all of the votes at the World Trade Organization. So it can be a real powerful force. And one thing, there's lots of divergence across the Commonwealth about what people believe. But the one thing everybody is very focused on is the rules-based global system, which helps protect the smallest countries, and I think that's really important and something all of the Commonwealth can bet behind. One of my first experiences as Foreign Secretary was attending the James Bond premiere with both the head of MI6 and GCHQ. So that was quite
Sounds
special.
like a tough gig.
That was quite special, and obviously they were just telling me about how the film was extremely unrealistic.
Do they get to keep their phones on when they're in, unlike everyone else?
I like the idea of the Female Foreign Ministers Collective, and I'll see what we can do on that front.
We'll come up with a collective noun for you.
We'll go on then.
Well, not yet, not on the spot.
Come on.
We might run a Twitter competition.
You've just asked me to come up with loads of stuff on the spot, Anand, so
Okay.
I want to hear it now.
A power?
A power.
There
I
we
like
go.
that. I like that. You asked me what I want to be doing in 5 years' time. I still want to be in the Foreign Office.
Will you be the best Foreign Secretary ever by then?
I'm not going to answer that.
All right.
The next question is about the Ministry of Defence. Clearly, Ben Wallace and I have a very close working partnership. There are huge opportunities for more security agreements, but also particularly in the technology space. So areas like cyber, artificial intelligence, quantum, these are really important areas where we need to work more closely with others. And just finally, on the situation, I mean, what you just said, those figures are completely grim and horrific. And I'll very much look at what you've proposed on the Global Fund, but I can't make any spending promises at this fringe meeting.
Brilliant, thank you. Let me just say first and foremost, apologies to the 2 people who have sent questions in online, but there was an absolute forest of hands here, so I didn't get to your questions. For those of you who know people who couldn't get in the room or would like to watch this, it will be available, or if you want to watch it again, it will be online on YouTube, you can get it there. Out of interest, we did an event like this with David Frost a few months ago, which is well worth watching. He's really, really interesting on a number of things. Finally, thank yous. Thank you to Paul and Conservative Home for hosting this so wonderfully, as ever. And last but not least, thank you, Foreign Secretary. It's been really, really interesting, and thanks for sparing us 5 questions more of your time than you intended to.
Thank you. Thanks very much.